Lesson 73, more on radical denominators. Okay, we learned in an earlier lesson that if we conjugate, we're looking at a problem like this and we've got a radical in the denominator, we want to get rid of that radical. We don't like these guys in the denominators. So the way to do that is we conjugate this and we change the sign of the second term. So we change the sign of the second term, change this to a negative to a positive, and we multiply. And we multiply this negative times this positive. We end up, these two middle terms, these two guys cancel each other out, and we get rid of that radical in the denominator. So we've learned that before. Now today all we're doing is we're throwing in problems where we have a radical in the numerator. And this radical in the numerator is okay. We don't care. It can stay there. So we're going to conjugate the denominator, multiply, get rid of the radical in the denominator, and we won't really care about the radical in the numerator. Now I'm going to take a shortcut when I work these today, and I want to point out first of all that I'm not going to multiply these two middle terms. I'm not going to show this process since they always cancel out. What I'm always going to do is I'm going to multiply this term by the last term by the last term, and the first term by the first term, and not bother multiplying the last term times the first term and the first term times the last term. So I'm just gonna skip that step in there. I'll show you when I work it, but just so you know what's going on and why it's working that way before we get going. Okay, we're gonna look at these two class practice here, and I'm gonna copy them over, and then we will get going. The first one is 5 plus the square root of 3. 5 plus the square root of 3 over 2 times the square root of 3. All right. Now this one, they threw us a curveball, because always before we had a double term on the bottom. I'm going to copy down our other one that we have to work, and it is 2 times the square root of 12 minus 3 times the square root of 3 over 2 times the square root of 3 minus 3 times the square root of 2. Okay, they've always given us these ones, and I thought that's what we were getting today, but instead, first off, class practice, they gave us one with just a monomial, just a single term in the denominator. This means this is super simple. How do we get rid of the square root of 3 in the denominator? Let's multiply the whole thing by the square root of 3. So let's multiply this guy by the square root of 3 times the square root of 3. Now, when we multiply the square root of 3 times the square root of 3, it equals 3. So 2 times 3. So this would equal, I'm just going to show it longhand, square root of 3 times the square root of 3, and this 3 times 3, this would equal 3, and this is 2, and that's 2 times 3, which equals 6. So on the bottom, we're going to have 6. Now on the top, we need to work this guy the long way, and the way we work him the long way is we go 5 plus the square root of 3 times the square root of 3 times, and we go to the square root of 3 times the square root of 3, which is just plain, well, the square root of 9 if you want, but it's just plain 3. And the square root of 3 times 5 is 5 times the square root of 3. And this is a positive since these are both positive. So 5 times the square root of 3 plus 3. 5 to the square root of 3 plus 3 over 6. That is our answer. That's done on the first one. Now it was quite simple. The second one, we must conjugate the denominator. And how we do that is we change the sign of the second term. So we multiply this guy times whatever this is. So 2 times the square root of 3 plus 3 times the square root of 2. And then this goes on top and the bottom. So we also go 2 times the square root of 3 plus 3 square root of 2. Okie doke. Now, multiplying these guys together. And we're just going to go, and we're just going to multiply the first term times the first term, and the last term times the last term. Because the other terms, if we multiply the first term times this, the first term times this term, and this term times this term, they would both cancel each other out because we've conjugated, so we know it. So we're going to multiply 3 times the square root of 2 times 3 times the square root of 2. I'm just going to copy it down. It won't hurt us any. So 2 to the square root of 3 minus 3 square root of 2 times 2 to the square root of 3 plus 3 square root of 2. We're multiplying this guy. Alright, so we're just going to multiply this first term times first term, and this last term times last term. We really should go this guy times this guy times this guy, just to show the step I'm skipping. So 3 times 3, negative 3 times negative 3 is negative 9. negative 9, and the square root of 2 times the square root of 2 is the square root of 4. I'm just writing it out long term, so we do see this step that we're doing. So 2 times 2 is 4. Square root of 3 times square root of 3 is square root of 9. So square root of 9 is 3, so 4 times 3. And negative 9 times the square root of 4 is 2. So 12 minus 18, which equals negative 6. Got it. So our denominator is going to be negative 6. We know this. Negative 6. And now let's do the numerator. And for that guy, we're going to copy him out longhand and put this guy on top. So it's going to be a long process here on this one, I think. So 2 times the square root of 12 minus 3 times the square root of 3. And then we're multiplying it by 2 the square root of 3 plus 3 the square root of 2. So 3 times 3 is negative 9. Square root of 2 times square root of 3 is the square root of 6. Okay, so 3 times 2, so we need to take this term times this term yet. 3 times 2 is 6. Times the square root of 2 times 12, 24. And now we go to move this term, multiply this guy times this guy. Square root of 3 times square root of 3 is the square root of 9. And 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. Now square root of 3 times the square root of 12 is, 12 times 3 is 36, square root of 36, and 2 times 2 is 4. Alright, so we got 4 times the square root of 36 minus 6 times the square root of 9. Okay, you can see it well enough. Let's get rid of these perfect squares if we can. So 4 times square root of 36 is 6, minus 6 times 3. Why did I write the square root sign there? Minus 6 times 3. And this is positive 6 times. And what can we bring out of 24? Remember the square root of 24. Square root of 24 is the same as the square root of 2 times 2 times 6. So 2 times 2 is 4 times 6 is 24. So we can bring out a 2. So we're going to bring out a 2. 6 times 2, the square root of 6, minus 9, the square root of 6. Alright, 4 times 6 is 24, minus 6 times 3 is 18, plus 6 times 2 is 12, the square root of 6, minus 9, the square root of 6. 24 minus 18 is 6. And then we can add, since this is a square root of 6 and square root of 6, we can go 12 minus 9, which is 3, so 6 plus 3, the square root of 6. And this is over negative 6. Alright, so this is almost our answer. One thing though we could reduce, since each one of these is divisible by 3, we can divide them each by 3, and that means we cancel this one goes to 2, and this one goes to 2. So we end up with 2 plus the square root of 6 over negative 2. We are done. Okie doke, have fun.